Hi, and welcome. You are listening to Listen and Relax. Sit back and enjoy crazy stalker stories. If you want us to continue making these videos, let us know in the comments what you think about the stories. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated when we post new exciting stories. These stories are all based on true stories. Thank you for listening. The shadow that wouldn't leave. When I first met Zoe, I thought she was charming. We met on a dating app, and while I wasn't head over heels in love, I liked her. She was social, funny, and we shared a passion for football. But what started as a casual relationship turned into a nightmare that lasted years. Zoe wasn't just my ex-girlfriend. She became my stalker. At first, Zoe seemed like someone who just needed a little extra support. She had a tough upbringing, with parents involved in criminal activities, and she struggled with mental health issues. She dropped out of school, lived on benefits, and leaned on me heavily. I had a stable job, friends, and a life outside of her. She admired that, but over time, her admiration turned into obsession. The first red flags appeared a few months into our relationship. Zoe became possessive, demanding to know where I was at all times. She'd show up unannounced at my workplace or call me incessantly if I didn't reply to her texts right away. If I went out with friends, she'd accuse me of neglecting her. If I had a family event, she'd come up with excuses to keep me from going. It felt like she wanted to control every aspect of my life. But the real trouble began after we broke up. What started as a relief, finally being free from her suffocating presence, quickly turned into a living hell. Zoe couldn't accept that I was moving on. She bombarded me with messages and calls, sometimes 50 times a day. She'd show up at my door demanding to know what I was doing. If I didn't answer, she'd peer through the peephole or try to eavesdrop. She followed me everywhere, shouting that I owed her money or that I was ruining her life. I tried to reason with her, asking if I'd done something to upset her, but she never gave me a straight answer. Instead, she escalated her behavior. She plastered my front door with hateful messages and skull stickers. She sent her friends to my house to ask where she was, as if I had any idea or cared. I felt like I was being watched, hunted, even in my own home. The breaking point came when I got pregnant with my new partner. Zoe's jealousy spiraled out of control. One day, while I was cycling to work, she and a friend rode up on a scooter and rammed into me. I fell hard, landing on the pavement. Strangers helped me up and called an ambulance. Thankfully, the baby was unharmed, but I was shaken to my core. Zoe had crossed the line, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending this would go away on its own. At my family's urging, I went to the police. They had a stop conversation with Zoe, but it only made things worse. She accused me of making her life miserable and refused to back down. The police told me it was hard to prove stalking without witnesses outside my immediate circle. Meanwhile, Zoe became even more aggressive. She called me, threatening to make my life a living hell. Then she moved into a house in my neighborhood. It felt like she was everywhere, all the time. I was terrified. I stopped going out alone. My partner had to drive me to work every day. I couldn't even enjoy my pregnancy because I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Zoe to strike again. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Stalking doesn't just steal your sense of safety, it steals your identity. I wasn't the same person anymore. I was anxious, paranoid, and isolated. Then in October 2022, while I was on vacation, I got a call from my mom. Zoe had taken her own life. My first reaction was relief. Finally, it was over. But that relief was mixed with guilt and sadness. I never wanted things to end this way. I just wanted to live my life without fear. Even after Zoe's death, the trauma didn't disappear. I sought professional help and underwent trauma therapy. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I became a mother to 2 beautiful children and found joy again. But stalking leaves scars that don't fully heal. To this day, I can't watch shows or movies about stalking. It hits too close to home. To anyone who's been through something similar, know this: you're not alone. Stalking is a violation of your safety and your peace of mind. It's not your fault, and you deserve to take your life back. The man who wouldn't stay away. When I was 16, I thought breaking up with my ex would be the end of it. I was wrong. What followed was a nightmare that left me constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid he'd appear at any moment. He wasn't just my ex, he was my stalker, and he made sure I could never forget him. It started with small things. He'd show up unexpectedly, always with an excuse to talk. But when I refused to take him back, his behavior escalated. He became aggressive, unpredictable. One night, he smashed through my bedroom window and broke into my house. My grandpa and brother tried to stop him, but he fought them off like a man possessed. The police arrived quickly and took him away. A judge ordered him to be placed in a psychiatric facility. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. 2 weeks later, he escaped. And just like that, he was back at my house, standing on my doorstep like nothing had happened. I called the police, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. His mother worked for the police, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting special treatment. Every time he was arrested, he was let off with a warning. It felt like the system was failing me. The worst part was the attack at school. I was in gym class when he suddenly appeared in the middle of the room. Before I could react, he grabbed me by the hair and dragged me to the ground. "You ruined my life," he screamed. It took 3 teachers to pull him off me. I was shaking, humiliated, and terrified. The police were called, but once again, nothing came of it. He walked away like he always did. His stalking didn't stop. He followed me everywhere. Once, he chased me down at a party and pinned me against a wall. After that, I stopped going out altogether. I was too scared he'd find me. My life became smaller and smaller, confined to places where I felt safe, or at least safer. I filed police reports, 6 or 7 in total. Each time I hoped it would be the last. But a year later, I received a letter saying the case had been dropped. No explanation, no justice, just a piece of paper telling me it was over, even though it didn't feel over. Not for me. I couldn't understand why he kept getting away with it. All I wanted was for him to face consequences, a community service sentence, a counseling program, anything. But it never happened. Instead, I was left to deal with the aftermath. I became hypervigilant, always scanning my surroundings, always on edge. I couldn't trust people easily anymore. I felt like I'd lost a part of myself. To anyone who's been through something similar, know this: you're not alone. Stalking is a violation of your safety and your peace of mind. You deserve to be heard, to be protected, and to see justice served. And while the system may fail you, your strength and resilience will always be yours. The charmer who stole my freedom. It was supposed to be a fun night. A neighbor's party, music, laughter, and maybe a few drinks. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a good time. But then I met him. Let's call him Alex. He was the life of the party, charismatic, funny, and impossible to ignore. When he talked to me, it felt like we'd known each other for years. By the end of the night, he asked for my number. And for some reason, I gave it to him. I still don't know why. If I had known what would happen next, I would have run in the opposite direction. The next day, the messages started. He said he liked me, that he wanted to see me again. I was flattered, but it felt too fast. I told him I wanted to take things slow, to hang out in groups first. That's when his tone changed. He got angry, accusing me of leading him on. And then the floodgates opened. He bombarded me with calls and texts. I blocked his number, but he didn't stop. He started showing up at my house, at my work, always with the same plea. I was his true love, and if I just gave him a chance, he'd prove it. At first, I tried to brush it off, but then the threats started. "If you don't give me a chance, I'll make you regret it," he said. His words were sharp, calculated, and terrifying. He knew exactly how to make me feel small, how to make me doubt myself. For months, I believed it was my fault. I was the one who had given him my number. I was the one who had led him on. The shame was so overwhelming that I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. But the fear was worse. I stopped going out. I avoided my own front door. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified he'd appear out of nowhere. My life became a prison, and he was the warden. Finally, I broke. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I told my cousin everything. She was horrified, not at me, but at him. She told me his behavior wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. For the first time, I realized this wasn't my fault. I wasn't the problem. He was. With her support, I went to the police. Filing the report was one of the hardest things I've ever done. reliving the fear, the threats, the constant harassment. It was emotionally exhausting. But the victim support volunteer helped me through it. She even told me about the Dutch Victim Compensation Fund and helped me apply for compensation. Writing down everything that had happened was painful, but it was also cathartic. For the first time, I felt like I was taking back control. The fund granted me compensation, and Alex was eventually convicted. He moved away, and I haven't heard from him since. But the scars remain. I'm still cautious, still wary of strangers. I don't think I'll ever fully shake the fear he instilled in me. To anyone who's been through something similar, know this. It's not your fault. You didn't ask for this. You didn't deserve it. And you don't have to face it alone. There are people who will believe you, who will help you, and who will fight for you. You are stronger than you think, and you deserve to take your life back. My ex-husband became my worst nightmare after our divorce. I never imagined that divorcing my husband would turn into a living nightmare. At first, I thought we could handle things like adults, set up a custody agreement, split our assets, and move on. But I was wrong, so very wrong. It started subtly. He would accidentally show up at the grocery store when I was there. He would drive past my new home at odd hours. I even caught a glimpse of his car parked down the street late at night. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "Do not flatter yourself," he scoffed. "I was just in the neighborhood." But how could he be just in the neighborhood every single night? Then things escalated. One evening, my best friend's husband called me in a panic. He had seen my ex standing in the shadows near my house, watching, just watching. My friend's husband approached him, but my ex disappeared into the night before he could reach him. I was terrified. I went to the police, but they told me there was nothing they could do unless he made a direct threat. "Has he hurt you?" they asked. "Has he broken in?" "No, not yet." I changed my locks, installed cameras, but that did not stop him. One night, my daughters and I were sleeping when I heard something at the back door. A soft, slow scratching. My heart pounded. I grabbed my phone and checked the cameras, and there he was, standing in my backyard, motionless, his face partially hidden by the darkness. I wanted to scream, but I could not wake my daughters. I had to protect them. I called the police. They arrived within minutes, but by then, he was gone. Again, they told me there was nothing they could do. "We need proof of a crime," they said. I felt helpless. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up to the sound of my youngest daughter crying. I rushed to her room and froze. Her window was open. The curtains swayed gently in the night breeze. I checked the cameras, my hands shaking, and there he was, standing at the edge of the backyard, watching. He had been inside. I called the police, but this time, I did not just wait. I grabbed a baseball bat and ran outside, screaming at him to leave us alone. But he just stood there, smiling. When the police arrived, he was still there, acting like he had done nothing wrong. They finally arrested him. But the horror was not over. At the station, they found something chilling in his car, a set of my house keys. Keys I had changed months ago. He had found a way in. I moved to a new home, far away, with a security system so advanced it made me feel like I was living in a fortress. My ex was given a restraining order, but I never truly felt safe. Because somewhere out there, he is still watching. And I know one thing for certain. He is not done with me yet. The shadow in my inbox. When I was 15, I thought I had found my first real love. He was 17, charming, and seemed perfect, at least at first. But when I realized the relationship was toxic and decided to end it, everything changed. He couldn't accept it. What followed was a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It started subtly. A few weeks after the breakup, I noticed strange things happening online. My friends began receiving messages from a girl named Emily. She claimed to be a new student at our school and said I had been spreading horrible rumors about her. The messages were vicious, accusing me of bullying, lying, and even threatening her. My friends were confused, and so was I. I had no idea who this girl was. But then Emily started messaging me directly. She knew things about me, details only someone close to me would know. She mentioned the park where my ex and I used to hang out, the songs we listened to, even the inside jokes we shared. My stomach churned. This wasn't just some random stranger. This was personal. I tried to ignore it, but the messages kept coming. They grew darker, more threatening. "You'll regret what you did to me," one read. Another said, "I know where you live." I felt a chill run down my spine. I showed the messages to my parents and we went to the police. But they told us the same thing. Without proof of who was behind the account, there was little they could do. Facebook wouldn't release the IP address without a lengthy legal process. Weeks turned into months. The harassment didn't stop. Emily began posting fake screenshots of conversations I supposedly had with her, making me look like a monster. My friends started to distance themselves, unsure of what to believe. I felt isolated, paranoid, and constantly on edge. Every notification on my phone made my heart race. Was it her? Was it him? Then one night, I got a message that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of my house taken from the street. The caption read, "I'm always watching." I screamed, waking up my parents. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, whoever had taken the photo was long gone. The breaking point came when I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside was a doll, a cheap plastic thing with its head ripped off. Taped to its chest was a note, "This could be you." I broke down. My parents were furious and terrified. We went back to the police, demanding action. This time, they escalated the case. Months later, we finally got the answer we'd been dreading. The IP address linked to Emily's account traced back to my ex-boyfriend. He had created the fake profile, sent the messages, and even taken the photo of my house. The police confronted him, and he confessed. He claimed he just wanted to scare me, to make me regret leaving him. But to me, it felt like something much darker. The legal process was slow and exhausting. He was charged with harassment and cyberstalking, but the emotional toll it took on me was far worse. Even after it was over, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and moved to a new house. But the fear stayed with me. Looking back, I realize how dangerous obsession can be. What started as a teenage breakup turned into a living nightmare. And while I've tried to move on, I'll never forget the shadow that followed me, both online and in real life. The night the fire came. When I was 23, I thought I had finally escaped the worst of it. After filing a police report against my stalker, my ex-boyfriend, I hoped the harassment would stop. But instead, it escalated into something I could never have imagined. What started as petty vandalism turned into a full-blown nightmare that left my family and me fearing for our lives. It began with small things. My bike was stolen from our driveway. At first I thought it was just bad luck, but then my car windows were smashed, tires slashed, graffiti sprayed on our garage door. Each time I filed a police report, but nothing changed. The stalker, both online and in real life, was relentless. I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went. My home, once my safe haven, no longer felt safe. Then one night, everything changed. I was asleep when a deafening explosion shook me awake. My heart raced as I bolted upright, my ears ringing. I ran to the window and saw flames engulfing my parents' car in the driveway. The heat was so intense I could feel it through the glass. Someone had doused the car in gasoline and set it on fire. The police and fire department arrived quickly, but the damage was done. The car was a charred shell, and our sense of security was shattered. We tried to convince ourselves it was a one-time thing, a random act of violence. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't random. This was personal. A few nights later, the stalker struck again. This time, it was even worse. I was in the living room when I heard the sound of breaking glass. Before I could react, a Molotov cocktail came flying through the window. Flames erupted across the floor, and I screamed for my parents. We managed to put out the fire with a fire extinguisher, but the room was left scorched and reeking of smoke. I felt like I was living in a war zone. The police increased their presence in our neighborhood, but the stalker was always one step ahead. It felt like we were trapped in a game of cat and mouse, except the stakes were life and death. Finally, after weeks of terror, we got a break in the case. The police arrested my ex-boyfriend and 2 of his friends. They had been working together, stealing, vandalizing, and ultimately trying to burn down our home. My ex, who was still a minor at the time, was sent to a youth detention center. His friends faced charges as well, but the punishment felt like a slap on the wrist compared to the trauma they had inflicted. What frustrated me the most was that my ex was never properly punished for the stalking. The charges focused on the vandalism and arson, but the psychological torment, the constant fear, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being hunted, was never fully acknowledged. To this day, I wonder if he ever truly understood the damage he caused. The scars from that time still linger. I moved away, changed my number, and did everything I could to start over. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear the sound of breaking glass and feel that same rush of panic. It's a reminder of how quickly life can spiral out of control and how dangerous obsession can be. The knock at my door. When I first went to the police, I thought they would help me. I thought they would listen, take me seriously, and do something to stop the man who was stalking me. But instead, I left feeling more helpless than ever. What should have been a moment of relief turned into a crushing reminder of how alone I was in this fight. It all started with the knocks at my door. Late at night, early in the morning, it didn't matter. He would show up unannounced, standing there like he had every right to be there. He knew the code to the gate, so he could get right up to my doorstep. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Every time I heard the gate creak open, my heart would race. Was it him again? What did he want this time? I finally mustered the courage to go to the police. I explained everything, the knocks, the gate, the way he seemed to be watching me. But instead of sympathy or action, I was met with indifference. The officer behind the desk barely looked up from his computer as I spoke. When I told him about the gate code, he shrugged and said, "Just change the code." Problem solved. I stared at him, stunned. Change the code? As if that would stop someone who was clearly determined to harass me. As if that would make me feel safe again. I tried to explain that this wasn't just about the gate. It was about the fear, the violation, the feeling of being hunted. But he didn't seem to care. "If you want to file a report, we can do that," he said, his tone dismissive. "But unless he threatens you or does something illegal, there's not much we can do." I felt my frustration boiling over. Was I supposed to wait until he hurt me? Until he broke into my house? Until I was lying in a ditch somewhere? Why did I have to hit rock bottom before anyone would take me seriously? In the end, I insisted on filing a report. It felt like a huge step, one I wasn't sure I was ready to take. But I didn't know what else to do. The officer typed up my statement, his expression bored, and handed me a copy. "We'll look into it," he said, though I could tell he didn't mean it. Walking out of the police station that day, I felt more alone than ever. The people who were supposed to protect me had made it clear that I was on my own. I couldn't rely on them to keep me safe. I had to do it myself. I changed the gate code like they suggested. I installed security cameras. I started carrying pepper spray, but none of it made me feel truly safe. Every time I heard a noise outside, I wondered if it was him. Every time I walked to my car, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. The worst part was the doubt. The police's dismissive attitude made me question myself. Was I overreacting? Was I making a big deal out of nothing? But deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't nothing. This was my life, my safety, my peace of mind, and it was being taken from me, one knock at a time. To anyone who's ever felt ignored or dismissed by the people who are supposed to help you, know this. Your fear is valid. Your voice matters, and you deserve to be heard, not just when it's too late, but before it gets to that point. Because no one should have to hit rock bottom before someone finally listens. The night he came through my window. When I was 16, I learned the hard way that love can turn into obsession, and obsession can turn into violence. My ex-boyfriend, who I once thought I knew, became someone I no longer recognized. What started as a messy breakup spiraled into a nightmare that left my family and me traumatized. It was late at night when it happened. I was in my room trying to sleep when I heard a loud crash. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up, my eyes darting to the window. There he was, climbing through the shattered glass, his face twisted with anger. I screamed, but before I could move, he was already inside. My grandpa and brother heard the commotion and rushed to my room. What followed was chaos. My ex started fighting with them, throwing punches and shouting incoherently. I stood frozen, watching in horror as the people I loved tried to protect me from the person I once thought I loved. The police arrived quickly, thank God. They arrested him on the spot, and a judge ordered him to be placed in a psychiatric facility. It was over. For now. But the damage was done. My room was destroyed, my family was shaken, and I was left with a fear that would take years to overcome. What surprised me the most, though, was how I felt afterward. Instead of anger or relief, I felt guilty. I kept thinking about him, about how he must have been struggling, how he must have been in pain. I didn't want to ruin his life or cause him permanent harm. I even hesitated to file a formal complaint because I thought he'd already been through enough. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that he'd get the help he needed, and everything would be okay. Maybe it was naivety, or maybe it was just easier to believe that than to face the truth. He was dangerous, and I wasn't safe. Looking back, I realize how much I downplayed what happened. I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting. But the truth is, it was that bad. He broke into my home. He attacked my family. He could have hurt us, or worse. And while I wanted to believe he would change, I know now that some people don't. Some people can't. To anyone who's ever felt guilty for protecting themselves, remember this: your safety comes first. You don't owe anyone your silence, your forgiveness, or your peace of mind. What happened to me wasn't my fault, and it wasn't something I should have brushed off. It was a wake-up call, one I hope others can learn from without having to go through it themselves. The teacher at our door. It started with a knock at the door. A teacher from my daughter's school stood there, holding a letter of apology. At the time, it seemed strange but harmless. My daughter had never even been in his class, so why was he here? Little did I know, that moment was the beginning of a nightmare that would consume our lives. The letter was addressed to my 14-year-old daughter. He apologized for crossing boundaries and said he wanted to make things right. It was odd, but we didn't think much of it. Stalking? That word never crossed our minds. We were naive, unaware of the danger lurking behind his polite words. Within 2 weeks, we were sitting in a meeting with the school's principal. The teacher was there too, offering more apologies. He seemed sincere, but something felt off. Why was he so fixated on my daughter? Why did he keep pushing to talk to her, even though she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him? The contact didn't stop. He started messaging me, emails, WhatsApp texts, always under the guise of practical questions. He asked how he should behave if he saw my daughter at a school event. He begged for a chance to apologize to her directly. At first, I answered politely, thinking he was just trying to make amends. But then his messages grew more unsettling. "The world is so unfair," he wrote. "You have her in your life, and I have to live with her in my head." That's when I realized this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a teacher trying to make things right. This was something darker, something dangerous. But even then, I didn't fully grasp the extent of it. The incidents escalated. He offered to do our grocery shopping, even though he lived miles away. One night, he showed up at our house knocking on the kitchen window long after dark. I told him to leave and immediately called the school principal. He left, but the messages kept coming. 35 in one night, some friendly, others not so much. The principal advised us to report him to the police. "Just in case," he said. So my husband and I went to the station. We still didn't use the word stalking. To us, it was just harassment, something annoying but manageable. The police took our statement and told us to document everything, every message, every encounter. They said to call immediately if he showed up again. It didn't take long. He was back at our door within days. This time, the police arrived quickly. That's when we learned the truth. He had a history. Other complaints had been filed against him. He was suspected of grooming, stalking, and even pedophilia. My stomach turned. How had we missed the signs? How had we let it go this far? We filed an official report just before leaving for a family vacation. I thought we'd finally be safe, far away from him. But I was wrong. On the third day of our trip, as we settled into a campsite in Luxembourg, I saw him. He was standing there waiting for us. My blood ran cold. "I drove 350 kilometers just to talk to your daughter," he said, "even if it's just for 2 minutes. I refused, of course. He left, but the damage was done. Our vacation was ruined. Every shadow, every stranger made us jump. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, terrified he'd appear again. The police back home monitored his movements, but it didn't ease our fear. 2 days after we returned, he was back in the Netherlands. Those 2 days were a living hell. We couldn't relax, couldn't sleep. Even after he was gone, the fear lingered. Looking back, I wish I had acted sooner. I wish I had recognized the signs, understood the danger, but I didn't. And that's something I'll always carry with me. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, don't wait. Don't downplay it. Trust your instincts, because sometimes the knock at the door isn't just a nuisance. It's a warning. The silence after the storm. When I broke up with Bart, I thought I was finally free from a relationship that had never truly made me happy. But instead of freedom, I found myself trapped in a nightmare that lasted for over a year. Bart, the man I once thought was stable and kind, became someone I no longer recognized. He became my stalker. At first, Bart seemed heartbroken. He begged me to talk, to give him another chance. I felt guilty, so I agreed to meet him a few times. But soon, his messages turned obsessive. If I didn't reply to a text immediately, he'd send 5, 6, 7 more. If I ignored an email, he'd call me relentlessly. My phone became a source of dread, buzzing constantly with his name on the screen. Then one night, he snapped. I was out with friends when I missed one of his texts. 2 hours later, I checked my phone and saw 39 missed calls. My voicemail was full of his messages, first calm, then angry, then threatening. "I'm coming to see you," he said. "We'll settle this once and for all." I was terrified. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound, afraid he'd show up at my door. The next day, he apologized, but it was too late. I told him I was scared of him, that I wanted him to stop. And that's when it got worse. He realized his behavior gave him power over me, and he used it. He bombarded me with texts, emails, and calls. He reached out to my family and friends, telling them he couldn't live without me, that I was driving him to suicide. He made me feel responsible for his pain. For 11 months, Bart stalked me. He followed me everywhere. I started going to the gym, and suddenly he was there too, working out near me, watching me. I'd go shopping, and there he'd be, standing across the street, staring. He never said a word, but his presence was suffocating. I stopped going out at night, afraid I'd run into him. I stopped living my life. The breaking point came when someone slashed my car tire. The mechanic said it was deliberate. I knew it was Bart. I sat crying at my best friend's house, exhausted and broken. She dragged me to the police station, refusing to let me suffer in silence any longer. "If you won't report him, I will," she said. At the station, I finally told my story. I showed them the texts, the emails, the voicemails. They filed a report and said they'd talk to Bart, but there wasn't much else they could do. It wasn't enough to stop him. Then I got one final text from Bart. "You've betrayed me. You're going to bleed." That was it. I snapped. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear. I felt anger. I wrote back, "This text is going to the police. Just like every other message you send, it's over. I'm taking my life back." And then, silence. It's been a month now, and Bart hasn't contacted me. I heard through a mutual friend that he has a new girlfriend. Part of me feels guilty for not warning her, but another part wonders if maybe he's changed. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I somehow provoked him. But deep down, I know that's not true. Bart's actions were his own. I didn't ask for this. I didn't deserve this. And now, for the first time in over a year, I feel like I can breathe again. The silence is unnerving, but it's also healing. Slowly, I'm reclaiming my life. To anyone who's ever felt trapped by a stalker, know this. You are not alone. You are not to blame. And you deserve to take your life back. Thank you for listening to these stories. Hopefully you enjoyed them. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more exciting stories.